Chapter 64:24. The commander immediately lowered his head and said in fear, "I dare not speculate on the orders from above. But I dare to ask because I heard you mentioned it. If it is not convenient to disclose it, just pretend that I have never asked." Lilia said calmly, "It doesn't matter if I tell you. Because this is another important matter for me to visit this time. It's time to start preparing now." At this point, she paused slightly, looked around at everyone, and said, "The big change means that the Lord requires all the cavalry guards and their families stationed in the base to be rotated. Some of the cavalry guards will leave and their families will stay. And some of the families will leave and the cavalry guards will stay. For those whose families stay who stay, other cavalry guards will naturally take over the duty. For those whose families leave, other cavalry guards' families will naturally be rotated in for you to take care of." When everyone heard this, their hearts sank to the bottom. Although these cavalry guards did not have to live underground for their whole lives like the dead soldiers, they still had no freedom. The lives of them and their families depended on the antidote of the Lord. Defection? They would never dare to do that. Because as long as they were driven away, even if the warrior's den did not hunt them down, they would surely die. Therefore, the biggest motivation for them to live like this was their family. Because at least, they still had their families around them. If they performed well and made great contributions, they would even have the opportunity to be promoted. After the promotion, they could work in more important departments under the governor's office. And their families would have better living conditions. They would even have the opportunity to train their children to become scholars. Once their children became scholars, they could obtain a legal identity in social life and live an ordinary life to a certain extent. But now, the warrior's den actually wanted to separate them from their families. What a blow it was for them! The commander asked with a heavy heart, "Madam, this is the purpose of this big change to separate all the cavalry guards from their families?" Lilia did not hide anything and nodded and said, "Of course, as long as they are in the cavalry guard sequence. No one can be exempted, including you, the commander." After that, Lilia said coldly, "Loyalty to the Lord is not just talk. The Grand Commander must ensure that if you have the intention to defect in the future, your family members will be rotated out. Before you want to defect, you will have more shackles. You can escape, but if you escape, your family members will be executed immediately without a single one left. If you die in battle for the Lord, your family members will also receive the highest level of preferential treatment." Lilia had some hidden secrets that she did not explain to these people. The order for this big change was not the decision of the Grand Commander John Woo, but the decision of the Lord Victoria. The disappearance of all the members of Cyprus, from the cavalry guards to the death guards, all made Victoria guess that the mysterious enemy should have a way to detoxify. Therefore, if the plan in Nigeria fails this time, she must guard against the mysterious man's rebellion in other death guards. Therefore, she came up with a method of major blood transfusion, which completely disrupted the cavalry guards in all the death guards garrisons. First, they were separated from their families. And second, their organization was broken and reorganized. So their comrades in arms also completely broke the cohesion cultivated for many years. In this way, if a certain garrison is targeted by a mysterious person again, these cavalry guards will never dare to be bewitched rashly. When facing the temptation of rebellion, once they consider their families. Because once any of them disappears, their families living in other garrisons will be beheaded on the spot. On the contrary, if they bravely resist the enemy, even if they leave behind a corpse or a head, their families will benefit from it. To put it bluntly, it is to use the family of each cavalry guard to threaten the other party, to ensure that he would rather die than defect. Victoria believed that once the blood transfusion was completed, any of the garrison cavalry guards would fight the enemy to the end. As for the death soldiers, Victoria had also thought about the same blood transfusion process. But the difference between the Death Soldiers and the Cavalry Guards was that the Cavalry Guards had contact with the outside world. They had legal identities in their countries and could be transferred to any place in the world at any time. But the Dead Soldiers couldn't do that. The Dead Soldiers had no identities. And in order to prevent the Dead Soldiers from remembering clues during the transfer process, the transfer of the Dead Soldiers needed to be completed when the Dead Soldiers were completely unconscious. Therefore, it would be very difficult to complete the blood transfusion of the Dead Soldiers. And it would be difficult to complete in a short time. Fortunately, the Dead Soldiers were guarded by the Cavalry Guards. So giving priority to the blood transfusion of the Cavalry Guards would ensure that they in each Death Soldier station would fight bravely. The strength of hundreds of Cavalry Guards should not be underestimated. Maybe they could hold off the enemy's attack and prevent the enemy from infiltrating the Dead Soldiers. The 5 military governors' office had been preparing for a while for the blood transfusion. They have to determine the exchange method between garrisons based on the geographical location, size, and population of each garrison. For example, the Cavalry Guards or family members of the garrison should be divided into how many groups? And each group should be exchanged with the groups of garrisons B, C, and D respectively. In addition, the exchange must be gradual, and the Cavalry Guards of all garrisons cannot be on the road at once, which will cause a defense gap. So they have formulated a rule that each time the blood is exchanged, only 20% of the troops can be exchanged. And the next batch can be exchanged after the supplementary troops are in place. According to the requirements, the Duke Mining Garrison will start to replace the first batch of people in 3 days. In the past few days when Lilia came, she seemed to be familiar with the situation and waiting for the equipment to arrive. In fact, she was making a list and determining the blood exchange plan and the list of each batch. Now, the plan and the list have been almost drawn up. And the first batch will be exchanged in 3 days.